We're here today on Country Pocket with Malcolm MacWatt. He is an artist from Scotland, and his new album is Dark Harvest. The first song you just heard is called The Church and the Crown. Um, I guess let's start with the overarching themes here. Tell me about your interest in sort of history and justice.
Well, okay. I mean, I think I'm Scottish. I think I grew up with that. With I suppose whole. I think the Scots have always had this idea of social justice. I think it's maybe being I suppose being what would be a colony of England. Um, Always sort of having to sort of live under different under rule that's not from within Scotland. So I think there's always been that sort of very long history of right and wrong, which I think is something that's probably been ingrained into me, especially by my grandmother, who I lived with for, sort of most of my sort of teenage years when my folks split up. So she was a really great source of Scottish history. Where we lived is in Murrayshire. So if you look right across the water, the Murray Firth, it's just a little stretch of water, you can see Sutherland. Sutherland's kind of where all of uh, I suppose, like a major Scottish injustice, which was the Highland clearances. That's when all the crofters were, kicked off their land in order to make way for sheep. So that's something that's sort of deep in the Highland psyche. So yeah, I think I just grew up with all that stuff.
Introduce to us the historical figures in the Church and the Crown.
So the Church and the Crown. So I'm now living in London. I've been here since 2010. I'm in Southeast London. So I very, very, very regularly, I mean, probably once a week, I walk up a street called Wat Tyler Street. Um, and Wat Tyler he was one of the main players in what was the I think what was known as the Peasants' Revolt. I think in 1381, if memory serves. It's probably the biggest um, uprising in I think in British history. It's it was a major it was a major event where Wat Tyler and the peasants who were all struggling to sort of make to try and earn enough money, especially after what was known as the Black Death or the Great Plague of England, which killed off hundreds of thousands of workers. And at the time, it was sort of decreed by the royal family that nobody could charge any more money for the work that they used to do before the plague. Um, Now, conditions were always pretty grim for the working, I suppose, the working man. And there was a big, all of the, I think pretty much all the various sort of, peasant groups and workers. They weren't really unions, but they had guilds. They all got together and said, "Look, enough's enough." They had this massive march in London. They all met up at Blackheath. There was a what was known as a lay preacher, so he'd been kicked out of the church. He was called John Ball, but he'd been excommunicated from the church for saying that every man was as valued to God as the next man. That a king had no more value to God than the most sort of lowly worker. And that stuff just didn't go down well with the establishment at the time. And big promises were made to Wat Tyler and John Ball, but right at at the very end of these negotiations, they were well, they were cut down, they were murdered. John Ball was hung, drawn, and quartered um, for his views. So it all ended badly for the peasants, and since then nothing's really changed that much, for working people in this country.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's bring it forward to the modern age, but no, it's
Well, I mean, I
feel
suppose
like there's still this situation where the church and the crown, and I guess more so than the church, the celebrities are sort of like living on one plane. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they say that the difference between rich and poor now is it's greater than the Caesars and and the Proles. It's such a huge there's such a massive difference in wealth. I mean, I've got absolutely no issue with the church these days. I mean, it's a different church. I mean, the church is it's a lot more independent uh, from this from the crown. The monarchy hasn't got the same hold on the church as it used to. But I mean, but at the time uh, of the peasants' revolt, I mean, the church also had part of the church were, I suppose, a warrior class of clergy who who had great armies, and uh, they uh, they put down the peasants with astonishing brutality. So it was a but it's a different church now. I'm not I'm not anti in no way am I anti the church.
yeah, the church certainly no longer fields armies. That's a
Yeah,
real
yeah, yeah.
development in human history. Let's fast forward a few centuries to Dark Harvest.
Mm.
Tell me about sort of some of the horrific means that people were considering using to win the Second World
Mm.
War, and how that wound up changing the course of history for a small Scottish island.
Yeah, it's see, this is another one of these stories that, or a side of history that you never get told about this in school. But that part of the world, so it's the west coast of Scotland. There's an island. It's a mile offshore. It's called Grunard, or Grinyard, as the locals call it. Now, all through my childhood, my youth, I I knew that island as Anthrax Island. There were signs on the mainland that were pretty much, you cannot go here. This is absolutely forbidden to step foot on on Grunard, and basically because it was still contaminated with live anthrax, or supposedly anyway. And in Scotland, that's always something that's this idea of forbidden land. It's kind of a it's an idea that's sort of difficult to take, because we have something called the right to roam here. So you have the right to go. As long as you're not causing damage, you have the right to go on land that might be owned by somebody else. They can't stop you. If you want to walk on somebody's estate or climb a hill, everything's owned in Scotland by somebody. Um, but as an ordinary person, you have that right to go there. So I was always sort of, I sort of grew up with the story of Anthrax Island, which basically during the Second World War, um, before America sort of came in, we were, Britain was it was dark times. The British forces had been pushed back into Calais, and a big evacuation there. The war wasn't going so well. Churchill decided, well, you know what? If we're going to lose, everyone's going to lose. I think is what his feelings must have been at the time, because they'd weaponized a new form of anthrax. And anthrax is kind of, it's always been around us, um, but they'd basically sort of made this new highly virulent strain of it, and they decided they were going to drop it on Germany if things didn't go well. So they needed somewhere to test it. Scotland has always been a bit of a testing ground for England. I mean, so I'll get to this later, but so they under because the island of Greenard, it's in the Highlands. It's not particularly highly populated. Uh, the British Army and all these scientists from Portendown, which is our sort of military biological weapons testing facility, which is still around. Uh, they all rocked up there. They brought a bunch of sheep. They put them in the island. They detonated a couple of anthrax bombs. Things died, obviously. They burned all the sheep. They burned all the evidence. But having said that, there were quite a lot of livestock also died on the mainland as well, definitely as a result of winds drifting over. But everybody at that time was sworn to secrecy. This is and literally after the war. I mean, thankfully, that form of biological warfare was never used. But after the war, the government just thought, you know what, it's too expensive to clean up, so it's only Scotland. We'll just leave it, and they kind of just, they just left it. Now, in the 80s, there was a period where Westminster, once again, English government, discussing where are they going to put the country's nuclear waste. And once again, Scotland became the sort of a subject of, we'll dump it there. So I think as part of that feeling at the time of protecting Scotland from all this, a group calling themselves the Dark Harvest Commando. They were apparently a group of scientists or scientific students who basically took a boat out onto the island. They dug up a load of soil, and they delivered the soil to the government's, to their sort of meeting at Brighton, and they also delivered it to the Portendown facility where it came from in the first place. It was tested. It was live. It was live with anthrax, and by the end of the 80s, the government decided that they would clean it up. I think for me, the best part of that story is the fact that to this very day, there's not a soul, or certainly not a soul in the police or the establishment, knows the identities of who these people were that did it. So these guys, that sort of idea of direct action for the benefit of the whole country, I was very down with that, and so that's really where the inspiration for the whole Dark Harvest album came from.
So you're supportive of it, even though there might have been some risks involved to human life.
No, I mean, it's it's never. I think it's always you have to sort of balance. I think sort of moralities and things. At the end of the day, I think if they hadn't shown a willingness to take pretty direct and action that that could have resulted in I mean it to me it kind of it does sort of border on terrorism, but I don't know. I think the means is sort of justified the ends in that particular case anyway, because I think if they hadn't done it, I think we'd have ended up having having nuclear waste dumped in Scotland anyway, because I think what they showed was a spirit of fighting back and doing whatever was necessary to do that.
So when you think about incidents like this in our history and the fact that we've got armed conflicts popping up all over the world lately, nationalism on the rise again, how much do incidents like this inform your worry?
Well, I think when I was first writing this album, I definitely I definitely did not set out to write such a heavy and at times um, very grim album. And there's times when and there's songs that I wrote which were protest songs, but they ended up a lot more resigned in tone. I think, I mean, the Church and the Crown being one. It's, you know, I think, I think as people, certainly speaking for me, I feel a little bit powerless in the face of all this conflict that's sort of going around. I think it's I feel that we're being sort of gaslighted on a major scale to have to go along with what I think are conflicts that can't really be justified, and they seem, there's an awful lot of it sort of seems to be around, once again, protecting financial interests, and it's uh, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of vehemently anti-war. I think people should talk, but it just seems that we live in I'm amazed that that we live in a time which is being officially called the era of post-truth. I mean, that just blows my mind, that post-truth, where the truth doesn't seem to matter anymore. And I think that definitely had an influence on the album as a whole. There's a song in there called "The Last Bowman," which is, I suppose, it's in a way it was about the loss of maybe that connection with nature. But I hadn't even thought about the Cold War for decades. I mean, the actual reality of nuclear war, I hadn't entered my mind for quite, for a long time, and all of a sudden it's it seems to be back in the agenda. Certainly, within the British media and British news, these sort of threats are they're quite whether whether they're designed to make us anxious or afraid, but they certainly cause anxiety and worry.
Yeah, I'm worried, and I feel like just my personal opinion is there. Everyone's talking about nuclear weapons, but I wouldn't be surprised if the war, at least if people fighting try to avoid that step at least and try taking things that are a little more covert and silent, like anthrax would be.
Ooh, I mean, yeah, I mean that would be a
I wish I didn't think about these things, but like you said, it's all over the media.
yeah, yeah. It's I definitely think that a time when yeah, I mean, this is the modern world as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you know, why are we? Why? I mean, why in the UK news at the moment are we actually seriously discussing a return to military service? You know, it's like, and I think that's kind of crazy because I just don't think I just don't think people would go for it. You know, I mean, they couldn't even persuade half of this country, you know, to wear a mask, you know, during COVID. So the fact that they're expecting people to you know, sign on the dotted line and go and fight somewhere, I think that's never going to happen. But you know, I mean, as the world seems to be turning ever more extreme, and you know, you start hearing all these kind of draconian measures being brought in, and you know, it's. I mean, Europe has become so much more uh, polarized around various issues. It's a lot more right wing than it used to be. It's the same with this country. From what I see in the states, there's a lot of that sort of polarization that it's people on one side of a fence or another, and you know, it's I just think, you know, where has this post Second World War period where there seemed to be a people looked to a more positive future, and there was discourse and there was harmony, and a lot, or certainly a lot more harmony, and greater ideas then of you know, cooperation and things. I think that just all seems to be going by the wayside now.
Well, on that positive note, let's hear Dark Harvest, the title track from Malcolm McWatt.